must unite. Black lives matter. Africa must unite. Black lives matter. Africa must unite. Africa must unite. Black lives matter. Africa must unite.
Toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave which have brought results.
We put the institutional Pan-Africanism around from the late 18th, 19th, then that will come to the 20th century, but some people push it back to as early as 15th century because of the slave trade and how people responded, and they think that that was also an expression of Pan-Africanism. We'll basically locate it within the African diaspora, where some Africans in the diaspora, that is, we're talking about people in the diaspora of African descent. So Africans whose ancestry located in the continent, some of them came together and decided that something needed to be done about the conditions Africans were in the diaspora. Those in the diaspora and those on the continent coming together to uplift themselves from racial oppression, both on the continent and in the diaspora. Of course, the first names that you have on the list will be Du Bois, Garvey, but the first Congress was organized by Sylvester Williams. We can talk about Blyden as well. Delany, there are a couple of them. There are a lot of people whose name come up, and then when we come to the 20th century, of course, you have the Nkrumahs and the Nyereres, but these were the forerunners of the Pan-Africanist movement.
Fellow citizens of Africa, I greet you in the name of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. You may ask, what organization is that? It is for me to inform you that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is an organization that seeks to unite into one solid body the 400 million Negroes of the world, to link up the 15 million Negroes of the United States of America with the 20 million Negroes of the West Indies, the 40 million Negroes of South and Central America with the 280 million Negroes of Africa for the purpose of bettering our industrial, commercial, educational, social, and political conditions.
Garvey's role in the Pan-Africanist movement is the way he was able to rally the masses. You know, the Pan-Africanist movement can be categorized into, can we say, the elite group and the mass-based group. The elitist group probably will be the Du Bois kind of people who are organizing congresses and all that. The Garvey kind of group is those who were speaking to the masses, engaging them. And within that context, Garvey basically is the most, I would say, most prominent person because of the way he was able to galvanize the masses and tell them to look to the continent for their redemption. So Garvey is famously noted for his Back to Africa movement because he wanted to bring the diasporans back to the continent. And he actually made efforts to bring somebody, it never materialized.
Pan-Africanism as a word was coined in 1900 by Henry Sylvester Williams, and then since then it has captured the spirit of solidarity, unity of people of African descent. But one thing that we need to know is that there were three movements that predated and preceded Pan-Africanism as an organized movement. And those three movements are Pan-Negroism, coined by W.B. Du Bois, in the conservation of races in 1898. We have Ethiopianism, which was a political, cultural, and religious movement. And then its main goal was to build independent African churches called the Ethiopian Church. And then we have the Back to Africa movement, which was about taking people of African descent in the Americas to Africa. And that movement became very prominent in the 19th century. And Marcus Garvey was going to be the greatest advocate of the Back to Africa movement in the 20th century. Talking about the Back to Africa movement, Edward Blyden, and then Paul Coffey, and many other were involved in the process. So these are those three movements led to the Pan-African movement, and when the world was coined in 1900. And then Kwame Nkrumah, who was at the Manchester Congress in 1945, after was going to be the one who will take the Pan-African movement to the level of the state when Ghana became independent in 1957 and when he became the prime minister and then of Ghana. So in that context, we will see that the independence of Ghana contributed to the decolonization of Africa and contributed to ignite Pan-Africanism on the continent of Africa. And many groups were formed, the Monrovia group, the Casablanca group, and then later on, those two groups were going to merge during the creation of the Organization of the African Unity in 1963. And this is how Pan-Africanism was going to reach the level of the continent.
Depends on how you want to define Pan-Africanism, which is very critical to the conversation we're having. It means several things to several people. There's a political aspect, there's a cultural aspect. So if we're going to talk about cultural aspects, people on the continent have been talking about African pride and the fact that we have to go back to our roots and take pride in whatever we have. So it wasn't like these were the first people to talk about Pan-Africanism. But if you're looking at the political angle and those who were champion people to come back, then of course, we're going to be looking at those in the diaspora.
Pan-Africanism seeks for total liberation and unification of all Africans.
I have interest in Pan-Africanism because that is the only way we can use to develop as Africans. And secondly, that's the way we can use to have confidence in ourselves as Africans.
Et vu que le panafricanisme lutte pour l'unification, pour l'unité et la solidarité entre nous, peuples africains et noirs, il est important de chercher à adopter ces valeurs-là. Et le panafricanisme a besoin d'avoir des gens pour l'enseigner aux autres afin qu'ils puissent voir qu'en tant qu'Africains, nous ne devons pas avoir l'esprit de division, mais nous devons plutôt être unis et solidaires.
I think it's a system of thought and action which is driven by the need to unite Africa as a continent, as well as the global African group of people, or what is sometimes referred to as a diaspora. Right now, this unity is supposed to be political, economic, social, cultural, military, sports. It's an all-encompassing unity that is supposed to usher in a better reality for us Africans.
Guinea-Mali union has laid down a strong foundation for redemption of Africa, for which we've been strongly fighting. Ghana, Guinea-Mali, the nucleus of the great union.
African unity has been described by Kwame Nkrumah and many others, but it comes down to basic things like having a common foreign policy, common defense, common currency. Those are sort of like the sort of basic sort of needs that need to be covered in order for it to sort of work in terms of practicality. But the fact of the matter is we're already unified in terms of our experiences. Myself, having lived in a number of African countries, one of the reasons I'm able to transition from one space to another is because there's so much that we have in common. Down to sort of very basic things, like even if you look at Ghana, you know, people play Oware. In Uganda, we call it Omweso, you know? In Uganda, we take matatu. When you go down to South Africa, you're in a kombi, and when you come here, you're on a trotro. So much of our lived experience is already the same. We are living very similar lives. So many of our influences are the same. So many of the forms of the oppression that we've experienced are the same. And so it only makes sense that in order for us to be able to take a step forward, we need to unite and sort of erase these sort of colonial borders and start looking at the ways in which we can then not just protect ourselves, but uplift each other, you know, and find a sort of common way forward.
Ever people are divided between Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. But I'm working within the Evers in Ghana and Togo. So I try to look at communities that partly are in Togo and partly in Ghana. How do they interact? So for instance, if I take the chieftaincy institution, how do the people relate to the chiefs on the other side? So let's say a community in Ghana, do they still pay allegiance to the chief in Togo? What do the boundaries mean for them? Because now this one is a Togolese, the other is a Ghanaian. How do they relate to the boundary? So for instance, if there's a funeral in Ghana, do they move over from the other side? Or sometimes do they even carry the body from Ghana and go and bury it in Togo? Why would they do these things? Because these are some of the things they do. They still pay allegiance to chiefs on the other side. So some even call themselves international chiefs because they have subjects on the other side. You have some who have Ghana card and they have the Togolese card. There are some who vote in Ghana and vote in Togo. They have the NHIS card, Ghana. Basically, for them, the boundary does not really matter. They have part of their farms on the Ghana side, part on the Togo side. Some even have their homes, the bedroom on the Ghana side, the kitchen on the Togo side. So as you go to some of these places, you don't even, if they don't tell you where the boundary is, you can't make it. Sometimes it's just a death road. And the next minute, you are in Togo. So how do these people relate to these so-called international borders that the post-colonial state has been holding on to? Because that was the fundamental issue with the Nkrumah's group and the others. People are still holding on to these colonially inherited boundaries. But when you go down there, what do the people make of these boundaries that the people jealously are protecting? It tells you that for them, these boundaries really, in most cases, I'm not saying every time, because sometimes they're also very conscious of the boundary. They are very quick to use it as when it's used them. But then largely, they continue their sociocultural lives as if the boundary does not exist. So then you ask yourself, if the modern state is so protective of this boundary, what really does it mean when the people down there really do not even recognize the boundary? You go through the Ghana-Togo border, Togo-Benin border, and the Benin-Nigeria border. And for someone who does not speak French, I was really surprised that I could speak ever throughout from Ghana to Nigeria. And it worked. So then I asked myself, when we talk about international languages, what do we mean by international languages? This is a so-called local language that transcends 3 international borders. And here we are thinking that if we can't speak an European language we call an international language, we have issues with communication. So for me, we need to rethink some of these issues about language. What do we do with our own languages? Because like we pointed out, which comes back to the nature of our international boundaries. These are boundaries that separate various communities. These are boundaries that separate various ethnic groups. So you have the Ever in Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. That is why it's possible to speak the same language across all the way to that space. And we have even languages that even go further than that.
the board of the Pan-African Foundation, our secretariat, the volunteers, all the associates, I wish to welcome you all to Pan-Fest 2019.
It's like Carnegie Woodson said, when you come through the educational system and the oppressive system, once you graduate, you have to be able to give you on the path of recovery. Because what have you graduated from? And what have you become produced into? And if you've not kept a proper balance, you've just lost yourself and got a certificate to validate that. So we must continue to have this kind of dialogue and not fear to go to the root and the foundation of what is causing the conflict and the problem inside of ourselves, because we've gotten comfortable with schizophrenic personalities. We have been used to having to deal in an oppressor's world and put on a mask every day, and now we must be able to understand and be truthful with ourselves. How much of the mask have we actually become? So until we're able to cut through that fine veil and face ourselves in that mirror, and as I said, be prepared to be born again as African people.
We Pan-Africanist women in Ghana, Kenya, in Cape Town, or in Brazil under Pan-Africanism will have the right to education, not to be forced to marry under 18, be given land to build her own future, will contribute to the development of Ghana and Africa. We must unite to achieve Pan-Africanism, and women must be in the forefront of this fight.
The time to speak about uniting Africa has come and gone. The time to dream about uniting Africa has come and gone. The time to act is here. The time to act is now. This year, let us promise ourselves that we are not going to put next year to waste. That Africans in Ghana will come together and break down the borders of Togo. That Africans in Togo will come together and destroy the colonial boundaries that have been set between them and the people of Benin. That the people of Benin will come together and break down the colonial walls of Nigeria. We want to see this happen in South Africa, where they break down the colonial walls of Botswana. We want to see this in Congo. We want to see this in Kenya. We want to see this in all over Africa.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Long live Palestine! Long live Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Revolutionary greetings to you all! Many of us are doing well. The All-African People Revolutionary Party reaffirms its long-standing solidarity with the heroic Palestinian people. We stand with all the justice-loving peoples of the world to condemn the massacre of Palestinian women, men, and children. The APRP calls on the Pan-African community to condemn the massacre and to collectively demand an immediate end to these attacks on Palestinian people.
Justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! Down, down police brutality! Down, down police brutality! Down, down oppression! Down, down oppression! Down, down oppression!
The fact that people painted the Black Panthers as hooligans, and that's something that we face here, and that's a tactic of the oppressor. For them, in order to sort of invalidate what we are saying, which is we are exposing a system of oppression and we want to dismantle that system and replace it with one that works for all. That's exactly what the Black Panthers were saying. And so you know, when you look at how the Black Panthers were reported on, you know, and people made them out to be like these super militant, aggressive, and dangerous people. And it's like, you may have that side to you, but that was also sort of rooted in their discipline. They had a goal, you know? And no one would talk about, for example, the breakfasts for kids that they were doing and all those kinds of things. And we find the same thing with us. The media will tend to report on, and skew reportage, actually, on what we've been doing. And they'll talk about the moments when our CIC is arrested and all of that, but they won't necessarily speak about when we are doing food distribution for the needy during a COVID lockdown. They won't talk about our blood drives. They won't talk about our capacity building workshops. So there's that aspect of it that I find sort of very interesting, and I'm learning how to handle it from that perspective as well. So you look at, you know, it can be frustrating, but then you also understand that that's the nature of the oppressor. And it is for you to just keep telling the truth. Keep giving the people the tools with which they liberate themselves. And that was something that was so powerful about the Black Panthers, the understanding that we can't just be liberating ourselves sort of academically. You know, while it is important to sort of philosophize and theorize, we also have to apply it to our reality. And so they understood that the resources of the people have to be made available to the masses. And so they were building on the ground, they were digging foundations and ensuring that it wasn't just them who would be building, but everyone who benefited from that would then be able to build. And that's what we are doing as well. We are pushing towards this sort of space in which people can reclaim the power for themselves. We are not saying replace the powers that exist or replace the system with fighters. That is not what we are saying. We are saying we are here to facilitate the building of yourselves. We are here to facilitate the reclamation of your power. We are here to facilitate the fight for economic democracy and economic freedom in your lifetime. So all we want is for people to take ownership of it. And when you take ownership of it, you say, this is what I am able to do, and I have the right to do it. And I can claim my dignity, I can claim my rights, and I can push for a world that is not just better for me, but for all those who surround me. And so for me, I think that is one of the beautiful things I learned from looking at how the Black Panthers operated.
Nkrumah's famous quote should be situated within what was happening in Ghana at the period, that is the Gold Coast then. He was asking for political, or he was championing a group calling for immediate political independence, because there were two major political parties asking for, not asking, but basically demanding that Ghana or the Gold Coast should be granted independence. Unlike the UGCC, which was also asking for independence, but then in the shortest possible time, but Nkrumah wanted it now. So that was why this whole thing about Seki first, the political kingdom and everything else shall be added onto it. But beyond that, for Nkrumah, it wasn't just about Ghana's independence, like he also again said. Ghana's independence was meaningless if it wasn't linked to the total liberation of the African continent. So for him, it meant various things. And as once Ghana gained its independence, he used that to also champion the cause of other nationalist struggles.
The father of African nationalism, Nkrumah gave funds to other nationalist movements and preached the message across the continent.
This mid-20th century is Africa's. This decade is the decade of African independence. Forward then to independence. To independence now. Tomorrow, the United States of Africa.
The Institute, with this relationship to this Pan-African discourse, also held this conference in 2018 to mark the 60th anniversary. And it was well attended, and we had scholars coming from global Africa. This is the way we call the diaspora and the continent together, global Africa, coming together to share their experiences. Scholars presented papers on various facets of the Pan-Africanist cause. There were activists also who also came to showcase what they were also doing in the Pan-Africanist movement. So I think it was a well-attended conference.
Our conference, AAPCR 60, is to acknowledge that the transformation of Africa lies in the hands of Africa's people. And the people, particularly the youth, are making this clear in the current struggles of social movements. The Arab Spring, which many people forget, started on the African continent, is only one such struggle. The Rhodes Must Fall campaign, the Fees Must Fall movements in South Africa, new social movements of young organic intellectuals, such as the Yena Mari, We Have Had Enough movement in Senegal, which is led by musicians, journalists, and students, are all advocating a new type of development thinking and living, and a new citizenship culture for creating a better Africa. Youth in Togo, Mali, La Côte d'Ivoire, and Burkina have also challenged the rule of kleptocratic dictatorships and have succeeded in exiling leaders who have run Africa's countries without accountability.
You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. You've been kept down for much too long. Stand up, please, and say I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land. All will be happy and gay. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land.
What is Kutukonavale? The most important expression of the fight for liberation by African peoples that came from the organization of the peoples of the frontline states and the organization of the peoples of Southern Africa, along with the Cuban revolutionary forces. Why is it that our youths do not know about Kutukonavale? Because they want us to think that liberation was a gift given by foreigners to Africa. And in the process, we will not see Nelson Mandela as a figure that came from struggle, but a figure who compromised. Now, we cannot stop at Kutukonavale, although we must teach Kutukonavale. Because in Angola, the generals who fought in Kutukonavale have turned their leadership in the military to the leadership in the accumulation of capital, and they have billions of dollars overseas, and that money is not going back into Angola. The same thing can be said about South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, and all the former countries. So liberation that we are embarking on, let's say for the next 15 years, because we're not going to wait 60 years for the unification of Africa, must be a liberation that is grounded in the workers and peasants of the people, and mobilize the scientific and technological knowledge that exists among the African people as we train the African youths. And as Walter Rodney says, we must go back to the underlying moment of history and have confidence in the capacity of the people. If they could have breached the gates of colonialism through their own effort, then it seems to me they have brought into the neo-colonial period a capacity to breach the walls of imperialism.
Two things come to mind. The first thing, and I've said it before, Africa must unite. We are not going to find any sort of sustainable development until we are united. It is just simply not going to happen. Africans must be able to stand for issues across the board, regardless of where the colonial borders fall. So that's the first issue that we have to, to be pushing towards. The other thing is we need to create a more inclusive democracy. In real terms, that takes the form of proportional representation. A country like Ghana, where 51% of us are women, but how many of us are actually represented in governance? And when I say proportional representation, I'm not talking about tokenism either. We can't just keep putting like single figures and saying, oh look, you know, we're progressive. It doesn't work like that. And so if we can start looking at those two things, we start covering all of the issues. Because again, so many of the issues are the same, and I'm a great believer in intersectionality. So I understand that even though your issue may not be something that someone from my demographic is affected by, until we are able to sort of address the root of that oppression, which is always the same, neither of those issues will be resolved. So again, if we work towards African unity, if we're able to come together and say we are addressing not just the issues in Ghana or just the issues in Togo, for example, but we are saying we are dealing with neoliberal governments, we are dealing with the issues, and then we understand that it is irrespective of where the border lies, that the issues are the same. Once we are able to do that, then we start making progress.
But in the socialist states, we must enjoy our fruit of labor. So why should I harvest for you to enjoy whilst I go hungry? In the socialist states, I can use Cuba for example, because they are socialists. They do things equally. Everyone is totally having freedom. But when you compare Cuba to Ghana, even doctors in Ghana, nurses in Ghana are not able to perform the health issues as compared to Cuba. Cuba is an agricultural zone. But when we compare Cuba to Ghana, though Ghana can also be an agricultural zone, we are not doing it. We don't have the tractors or logistics to do it. But they are doing it, and still they can take care of their health issues, and they are improving. They are developed, let me say that, they are developed. Whilst we are still stuck, though we have the resources.
Le continent africain doit d'abord investir, c'est très important, investir dans l'éducation. Nous avons besoin de former nos jeunes, nous avons besoin d'investir dans la formation d'experts qui seront capables de voir, d'analyser la situation et de nous dire comment est-ce qu'on peut arriver à un développement économique et social tout en exploitant nous-mêmes nos ressources humaines, nos ressources souterraines et puis nos ressources financières. C'est très important que nous-mêmes, en tant qu'Africains, nous formons nos jeunes et que nous investissons beaucoup dans l'éducation. Sans ça, on ne pourra jamais couper ce lien qu'il y a entre nous et les Occidentaux. Aujourd'hui, quand on rentre dans une entreprise ou quand on cherche à avoir plus d'informations sur comment les choses se passent économiquement parlant, on voit que la majorité des experts et des entreprises qui investissent en Afrique sont dirigées par des étrangers, par des Européens et par des Américains, mais c'est plus l'étranger qui s'occupe de nous, nos ressources. Nous ne savons même pas comment est-ce qu'ils le font. Nous ne savons pas si réellement, en exploitant nos ressources, c'est bénéfique pour nous ou pour eux. Et nous avons besoin de nous-mêmes nous former et de nous-mêmes de travailler nous-mêmes nos ressources. Alors c'est important qu'on investisse dans l'éducation, car un peuple qui n'est pas éduqué reste toujours dépendant des autres.
When Pan-Africanists were organizing for the decolonization of Africa to promote the spirit of unity and solidarity in Africa and between people of African descent, there was a major source of contention, which was the ideology. The question was around which ideology to build the unification of Africa. So many leaders were torn between two major ideologies, capitalism and versus socialism. It was also in the context of the Cold War. But many leaders attempted to transcend the divide the doctrinal divide between capitalism and socialism, and they try to promote an African value system. So some scholars call that the narratives of return. So this is how leaders like Kwame Nkrumah came with consensusism. Julius Nyerere spoke about Ujamaa. The president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, spoke about Zambian humanism, and then many others ideologies. And then Ubuntu, which became very popular in the 90s, thanks to the rise to power of Nelson Mandela after the dismantling of apartheid, can be registered or inscribed as one of those narratives of return. So the values of Ubuntu are compassion, love, sharing, caring, interconnectedness, interdependence. So these are, and consensus, these are all the values of Ubuntu. And many writers think today that Ubuntu should be the ideology through which Africa can seek its unity and its integrated development. It can be used to think about a new political system in Africa. It can be used for a new educational system, for another cultural revolution in Africa, and particularly, to think about what people call an Ubuntu economy.
Pan-Africanism is also about independence. One, we need to grow or be able to sustain our livelihoods. We're talking about food, shelter, and clothing. These are basic things that we should be able to provide for ourselves. And within that context, there are various ways of expressing that Pan-African identity.
We need to stop performing peace. Peace is not always about whether we are actively at war, whether we are actively sort of being beaten on the streets. Peace is also the ability to sort of claim your rights when you need to. Peace is the ability of the media to speak openly about issues. Peace is being able to leave your house and you left your house with electricity and running water, and you didn't have to jump over a gutter, and you weren't fighting with unimaginable traffic and rising prices and unmanageable fuel. Peace is about being allowed to live your life with dignity. And so those of us who are living in places where we say, well, at least it is not me, at least that's not my life, understand we are all sitting in that situation.
I've always said that it's the solution to a problem is education. It's leadership is education. As long as our educational system does not address our immediate challenges, i.e. psychological, physical, whatever it is, we are not going to go anywhere. You and I can sit here and talk as much as we want, because people need to be educated on what needs to be done. The inherited educational institutions we have weren't meant to address our problems. They were set up to further somebody's agenda. And we still keep these things and we think it's going to transform us. I don't know where we got this idea from. Until we transform the educational institution to really address the kind of problems that face us as a people. That is what education is supposed to do, help people fix their problems. As long as it's not doing that, I don't see the relevance.
2063 is too far. Africa has to unite now. Africa has to unite now. There is no way we are going to find any sort of true liberation until we come together.
The Pan-African movement has its roots in the struggle and fight against slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism. Our ancestors fought to free us from our oppressors so we could live a life filled with dignity, freedom, and self-determination. Their fight was just the beginning, and we, the next generation, must take up the mantle to totally liberate and unify Africa and African people. Today is our time. Let us march forward towards victory.
Ghana, land of freedom, toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave which have brought results. Narh of Ghana, everybody toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors.
Africa must unite. Africa must unite. Unite, unite, unite. Africa must unite. Unite, unite, unite. Africa must unite. This is our last piece. One CD is still for sale. You have to grab a copy now.